Today, we're going to be having a question and answer session and making this cute little lizard at the same time. It's going to be fun. So welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today's video is actually going to be a question and answer video that I had asked you for different sewing questions you had. We are also, while I'm answering those, be sewing up this cute little lizard that I had. I actually started on him years ago and it was never completed, so I thought this would be a really fun project. I'm going to be going through your questions that you provided me on YouTube Shorts and Instagram, and we're going to be sewing up this little guy and having him complete while I answer the questions. The first step is I'm just going to be flipping this so that the fabrics are right side together, and then I'm going to pin it up so that I will be able to take that seam all the way around, leaving an opening. But with that said, we are going to get started with our first question, which is from Instagram: scissors or rotary cutter? So this really depends on your purpose. A rotary cutter needs a rotary mat or a self-healing mat, which that is what I'm making this lizard on, and that allows you to have something so that the rotary cutter isn't like cutting up your floor or cutting up a table. And a rotary cutter will also need some sort of ruler next to it. This is really great for quilting, so you can get those nice clean edges when you're quilting. It also allows you to kind of slice through your fabric faster, especially if you were doing some sort of quilting that would require straight lines. Now, a rotary cutter can be used for things that are not straight lines. You can use them for patterns, especially if you get pattern weights. But what I found, especially if it comes to like if you're making garments, a skirt, a top, those pieces are bigger, and most rotary mats are smaller than whatever the garment piece is. So you'd have to move your self-healing mat around multiple times to get that cut. And that's where scissors or fabric shears are much easier. They allow you to just cut through the fabric. You don't have to worry about, damaging your floor. You would be able to cut everything out much easier using scissors. So the short answer to that question is it really depends on what you're making and how big of a project you're working on. If you have a very large self-healing mat or a rotary board, then I think that, rotary cutter is a quicker way to go. But if you're dealing with something that you do not have that large of one, scissors would probably be better. So now our next question, while I continue to pin up the lizard, is what sewing machine do you use? And this came from YouTube Shorts. So I currently have the Brother sewing machine. It's the Project Runway edition. I'll be sure to include a link in the description box. I found it super helpful and I've used it a lot. I got this in 2020. I believe that the actual model number is like CS5055PRW. I have not had any issues with it, and we're actually going to go sew up the lizard now using it. So I find it really easy to use. I've used multiple different stitches on it. It's all been great. Now, as you notice, the lighting is going to change in this video slightly as the closet door broke while I was filming this. So we're in the process of trying to fix it, but it is a little later than when I started this. So if there's any weird lighting, it's because we had to deal with the closet door. Getting back to the question though, I have found this sewing machine to be really helpful and I haven't had any issues. Before this, I did have a Singer sewing machine. I'll see if I can find what type it was and I'll link it in the description box as well. The only reason why I really got the new sewing machine was because it was a birthday present and I had the Singer sewing machine for years. The one big difference that I noticed when I got the new one was that it is so much quieter than the one that I had had for like 10 plus years. So now I am just trimming up my lizard so I can turn it right side out. So with that said, let's move on to our next question. Many patterns I make are just a bit too snug in the bust. How do I adjust? This question came from Instagram, and I have had to adjust patterns before, especially because they are too snug in one spot or another. And while I haven't had to do it for the bust necessarily, I have had to shrink patterns down so that they fit, in like the chest area better. I think there's multiple ways you could go about this. So the first is I would say if you have a new pattern or if you're working on a pattern, always be sure to have a mock-up, and the fabric should be of a similar texture to the fabric you're going to be using in the long run. So especially, I just bought a really expensive fabric that I'm going to be making a dress out of, and when I find the pattern I want to use for that dress, I will definitely be making sure that the mock-up fabric I use has the same stretch and texture as the expensive fabric. Now, besides making a mock-up, I also will try, especially if it's a new pattern company that I haven't used before, I will cut out the pattern so that it's actually like 2 to 3 sizes bigger than what I normally would go with. And the reason for this is then I kind of hold up the paper pattern to myself to see, like how is it fitting? Does it look like it's going to be the correct size, or should I go back to like what my normal size would be? I recently did this for a pair of pants that I made because I hadn't made a pair of pants from New Look before. I'll include a link to that video so you can see how I sort of did that process, and I ended up going between 2 sizes as that seemed like that was going to be the best fit. Then my third suggestion is, since I have not actually done this process before, there is a YouTube channel that I watch that has amazing videos. So it's called Thread Sewing, and they have a video specifically for, like adjusting the bust sizes for patterns. So you have to like do different measurements across your bust, and then it helps you to make it so that it fits both vertically as well as horizontally, and you won't have any gapping. So I will include a link to that video so that you can look into that, as that may help answer your question better than what I am doing now. I think there's multiple ways though that you can probably adjust for it, and hopefully when you're doing new patterns, you'll be able to make sure that it helps fit better, as I know that my go-to is always to have a mock-up in that very similar texture fabric, and to have it be slightly bigger than I'm expecting so that I can then size down when it comes time to making the final piece. So now we are moving on to the part of the lizard where I'm turning everything right side out, so then I'll be able to stuff it and basically complete this whole process. So turning the lizard right side out took so much longer than I expected, so we're going to kind of zoom through this part and head into our next question. And for the whole time I was doing this, the cat was watching us, so stuffing is here. She is overseeing us stuff the lizard, so she just wanted to make sure she had her little appearance. So our next question came from Instagram, and it made me laugh. How do you find the time? As I feel like I don't necessarily find the time, but normally what I try to do, since I do have a full-time job, is I'll sew for a little bit after work each day, and by a little bit that can literally mean like 5 minutes, so just doing one seam or just cutting out one piece of a pattern. And then on my days off, I will try to do like a little bit like larger chunks of sewing, especially if there's not too much going on. Sometimes we are running errands or doing other things, but I try to adjust it that way, and that way I can get the most sewing done that I can. So now that our lizard is stuffed, we'll move on to our next question. How do you make patterns for a transforming dress? I need the answer for a school project. Hopefully you weren't relying on me to provide the answer for your school project. I've done this video a couple weeks later, and I'm slightly unclear of exactly what type of transforming dress. So I'm going to go with the idea that you're trying to do like a thrift flip. So you have a dress already and you want to transform it. And the way that I do this is I always find a garment that is larger than what my size would be, so that I have extra fabric to work with. Once I get that, I'm then able to, I look for patterns that I already have or some sort of design that I've already done, and then I will use that to adjust to the fabric from the thrift flip so that I'm able to get, that new piece that I'm looking for and do that transformation. So now I'm just going to hand sew my lizard clothes as well as add his eyes, and that leads us into our last question. Is getting a sewing machine worth it, or is hand sewing enough to accomplish the same tasks? And I think this is a fantastic question, as when I started out sewing, I actually only did hand sewing. So I would sew doll clothes as well as Barbie clothes, and then I also did some stuffed animals, and I just had a needle and thread and little fabric scraps, and that's how I taught myself to sew. For most of those, like especially basic stitches, so you can see here I'm doing a whip stitch, you can do a lot just with a needle and thread, and you do not need a sewing machine. So technically we probably could have made this entire lizard just using hand stitches and going around with this needle and thread. It just would have taken a little longer. And to me, that's what the main difference is. So a sewing machine allows you to get it done quicker. You may be able to do some more fancy stitches and computerized work with it. But if you want to, you could sew a whole garment if you wanted to with a needle and thread. I mean, that's how it's been done for years and centuries, right? So it is possible, and especially when you're first starting sewing, I do not think you need a sewing machine. I think if you really want to start looking at getting a sewing machine, some reasons may be if you want to work on more intense garments, if you want to look at, sewing things faster, then a sewing machine definitely would be something to look into. And there's lots of bargains on them as well. You don't need a very expensive, fancy machine by any means. You can go to Joann Fabrics. You can probably find even some used, at your local thrift store. There's so many different places that you can get really nice quality sewing machines that work and do exactly what you need without spending a ton of money. So now we are just finishing up my lizard, so I'm sewing her little eyes in. I found these cute little flower buttons that I think will be perfect since the fabric itself has flowers on it. And with that, we are now going to sew the second eye on, which will be super quick to do. It's really funny thinking about that I've had this lizard and all this fabric cut out for years, and it took me maybe like 30 minutes to put it together. But with these last few stitches, my lizard is now complete and I'm so excited I have him. I hope you enjoyed this little sewing Q&A video. I hope you learned something from it. I know that I actually learned a lot, especially from some of these questions. I was looking up different things to see what would be the best answer for you. If you have other questions, be sure to let me know in the comments. If you want to see more of these videos, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you want to see next. Thanks for watching.